good to give it a sec, make sure everything's good.
So I'm gonna go to Twitch. I also.
I hope when the states go back up, we can...
Why are you saying?
Oh, you just started saying something.
Oh yeah, I'm pushed to talk. So I sometimes continue to talk after I let go of the one button.
Gotcha.
Okay, so yeah, we are successfully streaming. Everybody say one word starting with Cleveland, then Pinckney, then Matt. Everybody say one word starting with Cleveland, then Pinckney, then
So I just started replaying Cyberpunk yesterday after a small slump, but I have been playing other story-heavy games recently. Especially with the sales going on. I bought myself 2 really good story-based games, and those are Zero Escape, which is a Japanese trilogy of it's like room escape games, but with a plot connecting them. And they're quite fun. And then the other one, the other ones I bought are AI: The Somnium Files, which is a murder mystery by the same company and writer that made the Zero Escape games, and Paradise Killer, which is a phenomenal game from this summer where it's an open world murder mystery, but with like a 1980s like vaporwave aesthetic.
Yeah.
And it is. They're all really good, so I've been playing those. And like story-wise, since that we discuss here, they so far have been phenomenal. Zero Escape heavily uses story and gameplay intertwined. So you'll have options with the gameplay that also tie into the story. And it's all like room escape, like kind of flash games, but they're all interconnected. And I haven't even played the sequel yet. I'm still on the first one, but it's quite a good mystery. You play as you play as a person who woke up on like the modernized version of one of the Titanic's sister ships, and you have to sort of escape with the group of people, uh, using math and like various like objects and rooms, and it's quite interesting.
Cool.
And then Paradise Killer is phenomenal from a world building scale because it's about this like island where these people who are blessed by Lovecraftian gods live, and they're trying to like bring their gods back by building these islands and then sacrificing the populations, but something always goes wrong. And this time, right before the perfect island was created, uh, the entire like ruling council was murdered, and so you're an immortal detective who is sent to like investigate the murder of the ruling council, and like you'll like crush alibis, and like you'll find conflicting information and all sorts of things, and that really is something.
Yeah, we actually talked about that one on stream because we were deciding what our inaugural stream would be between Disco Elysium and Paradise Killer, and we went with
base.
I recommend Paradise Killer.
Yeah, it seems really cool.
What is okay? So, but can you hear me? I know you were just looking for a word from everybody, and we got a lot of words.
sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, no, we can hear you. I can hear you.
You're good. So if you can hear me, so who are these people? I am.
So this is one of the factions, one of the main factions, Maelstrom. They kind of run the.
Okay, so you described Maelstrom to me, and they're just people with a lot of cybernetic implants and stuff.
Yeah, they're my favorite.
Cult. They're like a cult.
Very much so. They'll rip out like in cheaply and aggressively, just huge chunks of their face and body for as much cybernetics as they can cram in, regardless of anything.
All I wanted was more character designs like these guys. I thought they were
Yeah,
so
I mean, like
well
this
designed.
dude specifically, like Dum Dum here, like his eyes, his face. That's pretty common for them. They'll have like holes cut out of their skull, right?
Yeah.
But this guy, I have never seen another implant that looks quite like his.
That's amazing. I mean,
And it
yeah,
looks
'cause
like he has a septum piercing, but it's
they're
just
not just bored, right? I mean,
yeah.
they're really, and they're actually much more awesome than the board.
Yeah.
This is the gang I would want to belong to.
Yeah,
And like
they're really cool.
their bodies, some of them more than others, like the main characters, their bodies do a great job at just visual storytelling. You know, you
Yeah,
can
exactly.
see it was done in pieces, and other stories that have involved the Maelstrom and like them kidnapping a river dock, and it's been cool stuff getting to know these guys.
No, that's
Power.
Yeah.
We have some unsavory chats and comment that I'm currently trying to ban, so keep talking.
Yeah.
Well, don't. I mean, we do censorship on Neophyte Studios.
There's some censorship that could be because of Twitch's terms of service.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not seeing what's happening, so
Yeah.
you determine what is what is it, and it's not Cleveland, is it?
No.
I don't even have Twitch open.
And Dum Dum's a good dude. They ran through the middle of the main story, and now I'm getting into their bar. Like this is their club that they own. I'm seeing this for the first time. But yeah, they've got some people here that have really. I've only seen one or two or three other people quite like that. And there was a quest with this like pop star. I'm hoping it continues later, where she did like a full body replacement like this. And this is the first time I'm seeing people that are completely cybernetic outside of that one quest. Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
What
Oh,
is it?
cool T-pose. Hey.
I would say, why is that person in a T-pose? What?
Just random.
That's just entertainment in the future.
Yeah.
They're just
a broken animation. I actually really like glitches sometimes. I think they're really fun.
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
It's just
That's really fun.
He's dancing.
yeah. No, you just don't get it.
Yeah.
No, it is true. And if I were in this world, I mean, there's so many things in the world that I really don't get, that if I were in this world, I would get even less. Although,
Right.
my sense is that my tendency toward ignorance and violence would actually work out pretty well.
He was waiting for me. How nice.
Dum Dum is a sweetheart.
Yeah, Dum
There
Dum
used
is
to
really
be a
nice.
glitch where he would like become a follower.
Oh, really? That's
So
funny.
this is the mission that was glitched, where he was waiting for you. You have the opportunity to kill him earlier in this story.
You killed Dum Dum?
I did not.
I
And
did.
so if you kill him, right, this bit right here changes. I did not, and so until last patch last week, he was not spawning where we met him.
Yeah.
So this is the first time this quest is working for me.
Yeah.
And this is a side quest. This is not a.
No, this is a side quest. It's a pretty major secondary quest line, I would say.
Yeah, I was
Some
gonna say
pretty
this
major
is
characters.
not like a spoiler, mute the video or whatever, but this is part of like Johnny's side quest line, right? Yeah.
And I like that bit of dialogue. This is the Maelstrom leader, Royce. All the meat faces look the same to me. Just a great little bit of their culture, world building. Look at her. She just has a straight up camera in her eye.
Yeah, that looks like
That's
a
just...
GoPro.
Yeah.
This is something that I found very interesting. One of the things that stood out to me with the dialogue in Cyberpunk 2077 was that, so you can just kind of scroll through the options with your mouse wheel, or you can look at the individual characters and then it will select the one of the dialogue options for them.
Yeah, like
Um,
these are broken down by Royce.
or
This is
Nancy.
Nancy's. So when I switch and I'm using a controller to look at one versus the other,
Yeah,
it'll pop my option to
from
there.
Nancy to
And they'll
Royce.
also comment like, why is it
Yeah,
taking so long with how you're doing? And I got that cool dialogue option for having 20 tech.
yeah,
That's
for
very
being.
rewarding.
Yeah, it's cool. This is something that is just going to continue to, like, now that I am thinking so heavily on how to write dialogue options and how they work, I am continuously, like, it's broken for me, dialogue options, like especially skill check dialogue options, where I like, they're cool, they're fun, and I'm glad that they exist, but I wonder how they can be iterated on, how they can be improved, because it's very interesting that, like, based on a character's skill, they can make a particular comment about where they are in a story on who they're talking to, the various things that go into that. But it's still something that is not, I don't know. Let me back up. So one of the things I find really interesting in, like, Fallout 4, for example, is if you have a really high speech skill, or Fallout 3 or whatever, if you have a really high speech skill, then you can just skip dialogue, or you can skip combat. Like, it allows you to just skip combat because you can talk your way out of it, which to me feels really weird and wrong, right? Like, it you, if you level up one skill so high that you don't have to play the game, then why play the game? If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So that's something that, like, even though I think 2077 implemented it better, because no matter what, you still play the game, and the level designs are still open enough that you can kind of play them however you want. So you don't literally just skip gameplay a lot of the time. But I do wonder how that gets iterated on in a meaningful way, where having a high skill doesn't just give you a dialogue option, it also gives you something else to do, right? Like, maybe it changes the quest. So instead of go kill five baddies, go kill five baddies, it's go get their computer, right? Um,
Yeah.
Something like that, that seems more meaningful to an RPG. Because, like, in my game, in the disc jockey, I don't have any skill checks. There are no skills. Like, DJ Vomit is DJ Vomit. DJ Vomit's good as what he's good at, and he's bad at what he's bad at. And he's, what I found as I've been writing the character is he's not particularly good at being talked down to. So if people talk down to him, his dialogue choices get really expensive
Okay.
because he's emotionally distraught by the fact that people are talking down to him.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I think that's an interesting question, right? I mean, because and this goes to, what's a story, what's a game, are all games stories, and that kind of thing, right? Because
Mhm.
the there's something weirdly puritanical. Maybe that's not exactly the right word, but you all can help me refine this idea.
Sure.
There's something weirdly puritanical to the idea, or even not Calvinist exactly, but where to the idea that the reason to play a game is to get better at skill.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's just, I mean, and I remember having this problem with games years and years ago, and thinking like, okay, whatever I'm doing, like whatever I'm getting better at, I'm learning to trade in outer space and what people want and what they don't
Mm-hmm.
want and how to make a profit. But then it was like,
Yeah.
okay, but I'm learning to just do that better and better. And I
Yeah.
don't really have a life. So why do I even care? You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
Like, and games like Elite Dangerous, yeah, which seem like they could be powerful engines for narrative
Yeah.
because they give you a whole universe. The problem is they give you such a narrow range of possibility, right? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there's
Totally.
no there's no reason to be doing anything you're doing. Like
Right.
everything you're doing, and it seems like it's sort of the same in RPGs, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're playing in order to win the quest. You're not
Right.
ever doing anything because you like it or because that's what you would do or because you're addicted. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and,
Yeah.
and it's in that way that the stories seem a little immature.
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And so I think what you're talking about one aspect of how to move beyond the current immature story structure of game
Right. Yeah.
and the things that are taken to be games, right?
Yeah.
It's like a novel. It's like if every novel were a quest novel, and all the characters did in that quest novel was do things to beat the quest, and
Hmm.
every conversation they had was about the quest or was in order to make somebody do or give them. Somebody, I'm having this conversation. Matt is strangling a dude in a toilet.
Yeah, well, I need to get out, and I want to see.
What was I thinking?
Jeez, man.
That isn't. Don't you leave bathrooms like that? Isn't that
Wait,
how?
hold on. He had loot on him. I'm sorry. Let me just.
What is?
There we go.
Okay, yeah, that's better. Now you killed him for a reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
EMP grenade, right? But I mean, and it seems to me what our purpose is, right? If we have a purpose, as a Twitch channel, as a like school of thought, as a
Yeah.
MFA program that's now involving itself in these contemporary story forms, right? Is to figure out like what was so. I think you're talking about one aspect of an overall like revamp of the idea of what
Right.
narrative choice is,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That
Exactly.
that it isn't just okay. Like in Fallout 4, I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna get good at big guns, and I'm never gonna
Yeah.
bother with energy weapons or small arms or whatever, right?
Right. Right.
And that's a weird assumption about human nature and about the way we like.
Well, and it comes from like a metagaming like aspect. Like you are engaging with like the game, not the fiction. You're engaging with the limitations of the
Yes.
program instead of the story.
Right.
No,
Yeah.
that's right. But see, the thing is, like these like templates or assumptions seem to me to come out of a kind of limited technology where we don't have those limits now, or at
Right.
least the limits are much less obvious. And
Right.
right, but we're still like this game. This is a brilliant game, and I will make all the disclaimers. Like I'm not putting anything down. I think it's beautiful. I love watching it. Like I would watch this like I would watch a television show.
Right.
At the
But
same
the
time,
issues that exist and people are complaining about, they're completely valid. It's
yeah,
just it also happens to be wildly entertaining.
yeah. I mean, but right, we always want to make something better. Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
every iteration is just a chance to say, okay, here are the ways in which
Shit.
this could be more entertaining, and then we do that ourselves, right? I mean, that's what writers do.
Right.
As
Right.
you read a short story, you go, "That was freaking great," but wouldn't it have been better if it had had a robot or a dinosaur?
Right. Right.
And and so you do your own version, but with a robot or a dinosaur.
Right.
And so
Preferably both.
well, and maybe combined, like a robo dinosaur.
Oh,
You can never
yeah.
fucking lose,
If
right?
you have a cyborg dinosaur in your story,
Win. You just win. That's it. So, but yeah. So it's, but the mechanics of this game are like the mechanics of every game I've ever played that was anything like this.
Yeah.
All the way back to games like System Shock.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's
I
a.
mean, where the roots of this game aren't necessarily System Shock, but the roots of Cyberpunk 2020 are Deus Ex.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Deus
that
Ex
A lot of the
definitely
coolest
fits.
parts of Deus Ex, this Cyberpunk doesn't like totally
But
execute.
ultimately, I think Pinckney's right in that this is not that different from Skyrim, from a play perspective. It's not that different from it's not that different from a single controlled character, like so non-party. So I'm saying like not Baldur's Gate.
Yeah.
It is just like Fallout. It is just like Skyrim. It is just, I mean, from a looter perspective, it's you run around, you kill stuff, you get gear, you get better, you choose points that you're going to spend. I mean, it's an RPG. This is what RPGs are. But I think this goes back to a problem that I was detailing out a couple of weeks ago, maybe even last week, which is that all we do is iterate on these concepts, and their
Right.
iteration is not being done on other things, right? So
Yeah.
like they add dialogue to an RPG because narrative choice and consequence is something that is in RPG. So you can select plot A or plot B for a quest, right? And now that I've written a like literally 10-minute game that is all dialogue, I can totally attest that it is a nightmare to write. I mean, it's hell to write every iteration of a narrative. Disco Elysium blows my mind now that I've written a
Yeah.
10-minute version
And
of
you
Disco.
can you see how complex the narrative structure
It's
is, right?
unbelievable.
The dialogue structure. Yeah.
It's
Yeah. But
unbelievable.
see, but isn't that the thing? Like, I mean, doesn't it have like 1 million words?
Yeah, it's like a million
So,
words
you know, I
for
mean,
yeah.
it's bigger than the Bible. You know, I mean,
Right.
it's you know, it's a vast amount of narrative,
Right.
and we talked about this in our disco episodes, right? That we admired that it doesn't make you do all that dialogue, right?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
it's fine if you only see 10% of the dialogue
Right.
in any
Right.
given playthrough, which gives it a kind of confidence,
Yeah.
right? It's not like an MFA story where you learned about motorcycle gangs and you went, well, they never learn about anything that interesting, but you learn about I don't know what, like
My family.
how how a how a how a nonprofit works or something, but you want all of that in the story. You don't want
Right.
anybody to miss the fact that you learned all of these things.
Well, and this is a joke in game design too, where like where you know that no matter what, you're going to end up fighting the main bad guy at the end because damn it, like those 3D modelers spent a long time
Right.
modeling
Right.
that bad guy, so you're going to see him one way or the other. Like unless you
Well,
turn the game on.
and movies are the same way, right? Like you're
Yeah.
always going to fight and it turns out it sometimes ends up really weird, like in Wonder Woman, Wonder Woman, where she ends up fighting like some old English guy. You know
Right.
what I mean? And I'm like, what the hell is that? Like, I mean, he's like some English, like army.
Aristocrat. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then it turns out, oh, he's Ares, the god. But I mean, he's just like unimpressive,
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like I can imagine they're having some kind of competition that might be interesting, but like Gal Gadot is clearly going to beat this guy up. Like
Right.
I really don't want to see her just beat the shit out of an old English dude. That's
right,
depressing.
exactly. I mean, he's some guy like I would feel bad beating him up, and
Yeah.
theoretically, like he's the god of war and chaos and blah blah blah. But their determination that at the end of every one of these movies, there's a huge punch up leads right. It always leads you into very weird places, right? It's
Yeah.
like or like M Night Shyamalan, right? The idea that he has to have a twist at the end of his movies leads him into some very weird, like just misinterpreting what an actual narrative virtue is.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, totally. Well, and so, I mean, I think this is what's coming to, I think, the crux of the conversation that we're trying to have, which is that, so on the one hand, we have like an elite dangerous or a freelancer, and I think freelancer did actually have like a narrative to it. But so elite's probably a better thing, where elite it places an enormous amount of responsibility on the player to invent the story in their mind, right? So like, being a slaver, like getting slaves from various starports and then transporting them. You can, if you spend a lot of time thinking about it, you can build your own narrative that has its sequences, it has its ups and downs, the time you got caught. I mean, you can intentionally get caught if you want to like simulate the fall of the hero. Stuff like that. You can do that if you want, but it's all on the player to do it, right? And then we have games like Cyberpunk, or the majority of games, which is there are gameplay elements and then there are story elements, and they are separated. There is a line between them, and the gameplay affects the
And
story
you
elements.
only do the gameplay, or like the gameplay gets you to the story element.
Right.
Then the story element happens, and then you do more gameplay to get to the next story element.
Right.
And
there's
one thing
yeah.
with Elite Dangerous is there's no there's no pretense to it, right? It is kind of that like nebulous, you make your own story, and so that attracts a certain sort of person that wants to
Right.
engage in that specific way.
Right. And well, it can be cool. It can be super duper cool to have
Oh, yeah.
that option. But the thing that I think that this is what I've been thinking about for like 2 years now and researching is that where games need to go is figuring out how to blend those two together better. Like, how do you? This is why disco, I think, genuinely is a step forward because it genuinely does blend the two better. The narrative is the game, right? And not all games need to be like this. I'm not saying that if your game is like this, then it's, or like Cyberpunk or whatever. I mean, if you made a game like Cyberpunk, then you're way better than me. But like I think in terms of talking about the medium itself, talking about gamified narrative,
Right.
the blending of that line between narrative and gameplay is something that is going to have to be figured out and talked about more, right? And thought about more. And so, like for example, the game that I'm going to enforce we play next week, RimWorld, is I think it does a really interesting job of being a narrative generator. And the reason why is because it adds detail where other games don't. They kind of just tell you the detail. So like for example, just a baseline understanding of what RimWorld is. You crash land on a planet, you have 3 survivors, you can give them orders and they do the orders, right? They can act on their own. It's kind of like The Sims in a way. Like this, like a Sims family, except for
Right.
way more complex.
Yeah.
And so you give them orders, and the goal is to just stay alive. Basically, it's a very lofty kind of abstract goal. Just stay. I mean, but it's also a very concrete goal in that it's like don't die.
Yeah.
But the thing that is great is that it has an artificial intelligence that tells the story. And what I mean by artificial, it doesn't tell the story with words, it tells the story with ludic, with gameplay elements. So like the AI will randomly send um, packs of people to come try and take your shit. And then one of your characters will have a moment of triumph where they kill them and then they realize that the only thing that they're good for is killing, right? So then they'll start carving stuff into their weapons, and you can click on the weapons that they hold and you can read the carvings and what they depict. And and then one character will get really good at art. Like I had a woman in my clan who
Yeah.
she was pretty good at art, and so she started making sculptures because she didn't know what else to do. She wasn't particularly good at mining or growing crops or harvesting, but she was good at art, and so she started making sculptures that made all of the other people happy. And I started reading the descriptions because they're randomly generated by the AI storyteller. The descriptions
Yeah.
are, but they take from things that have happened in the game.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
So yeah, so she's making little memorials to
yeah,
stuff that has happened to
yes,
like to like mileposts,
yeah,
right?
right. So she made a like
Landmark
a
events and stuff.
I think she made a sculpture depicting like the first time they grew rice.
Sure.
Like it was really weird. It was like, and she drew out like this is Peter, my friend. This is Sarah, my other friend, and this is a sculpture that depicts the first time we successfully grew rice together, which was like apparently really meaningful to her. And everybody was so pleased with that that they put it in the center of the room, right? And then two characters got married, and everybody went to the wedding in the kitchen that was in the
And the
mountain.
cops after me.
Uh,
Well,
who knows?
I
But like,
stopped a crime.
but these are all ludic elements that are telling the story,
Right. Yeah.
right? Um,
Right. Well, but see, that's exactly. I mean, a couple of story things about that, right? About how stories are told. Josh Woods, whom you all know, former student of mine,
yeah.
teacher, excellent writer, excellent theorist about story. Um, when we were talking about what was wrong, and this was early on. This was probably second season when the problems with The Walking Dead were becoming really apparent. Right after
Uh-huh.
what I think was pretty brilliant first season, and then you
Yeah.
fall into the second season. It's like what's happening, and this show just goes on and on and on. It's like what one of the problems he says, what they're not doing that people would do in that situation and that people have done since time immemorial, like they don't ever name anything, right? So they don't have like one of the things that for instance World War Z did really well in that genre was it like name things like the Battle of Trenton was a thing. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And when anybody referred to the Battle of Trenton, there was a kind of gravitas to that reference
Yeah.
because it was in their world, you know, and what people do, you know, like in the Old Testament or in ancient civilizations, is they build cairns, they build piles of rock.
Here I raised my Ebenezer.
Yes, exactly. Here's my Ebenezer. Exactly right. And right, and so you know, so there are ways that we memorialize our own history so that we look back and the story isn't just like our memories of things that have happened, right? They're
Yeah.
actual like structural elements to our story, and
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
things become codified and have meaning, right?
Mhm.
So that, but that's not, you know. So it sounds like RimWorld does that
Yeah.
to some extent, or can do that, whereas my sense is this game doesn't really do that, right?
Well, I mean, it has it. Like the other characters will talk about, like the great core wars and stuff, but that's all. That's still on that other divide. That's
Right.
in
No,
that's in the
because that's all
separation.
built in. But they
Yeah.
don't talk about like your. Well, I don't know because I haven't
They
played any of
don't.
them.
They don't. You're right.
Right. There's not a, and it never. You know, it's like the craziness in um, Skyrim, right? Where you're the Dragonborn, you can kill people just by yelling at them, right? You're like this monster, and you walk into a village, and these stupid village guards are like, "Hey, watch out," you know,
Yeah. Right.
wanderer or
Yeah.
whatever. You're like, "Fuck you," right? I mean,
You're under arrest.
yeah, exactly. And I'm like, you understand? Like, it would take me 5 minutes to destroy your whole fucking town, right? Like, and
Totally.
it's not, and it's not like that's a secret. It's not like I'm wearing a disguise. Like I'm this big motherfucker, right? Who's got weapons that are glowing, and
Right. Right.
and so I mean, it's sort of like First Blood, right? Like Brian Dennehy's a pretty tough guy, but he's also a big fat old guy. Why is he fucking with this guy, right? Like,
Hmm.
look at him. Like,
Yeah.
look at Rambo. Take a second. You know what I mean? And whereas like Hobo with a Shotgun works because it's well,
Okay, hang on. I was not expecting my 2020 to end with an allusion to Hobo with a Shotgun.
Hobo with a Shotgun.
Really made my year, friend.
Brilliant piece of work. That was amazing. I mean, but it's kind of an old, heavy set, weird Dutch guy, and so you think, okay,
Yeah.
I can probably him. Yeah, or whatever. Anyway, all I'm saying is that there's no like historicity. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's no like when I write a story, I'm writing a story out of my characters all have a history, and much of that history is in my other stories, right? Like I know the world that they live in, and it has certain landmarks,
Yeah.
right? And it just conveys a kind of depth or something like that. Yeah, but
Yeah.
and like you say, these stories have
No.
these games have backstory, right? But they don't have forstory. There's nothing.
Right.
You're not building a part of a new backstory.
Right. Right. Well, and I
which is
mean,
which is what all ancient stories are about. What's happening in the story, yes, but also like what the like you're adding your layer to that archaeological like cake.
yeah.
You know?
Yeah, well, I think that there is a genuinely huge audience for what we're talking about because there are games that are doing this. It's just that I think they could use some writerly help.
Yeah.
Like RimWorld, I genuinely think is doing that. It's doing a great job of making the world that you invented feel very real and confident. I guess is the word that I want to say. Like the world feels confident in its existence. Um, and so like another example in a RimWorld playthrough that I did was I intentionally made my characters not particularly good at various things. So like only one character would be able to hunt, and the other two weren't good. And the only character who was good at hunting was this young girl, and she was paired up with these like kind of burly teenage kids who are afraid of guns. And so it played out exactly how that narrative plays out. Like they got attacked, and the two guys who were afraid of guns were like, "Oh God, I don't know what to do." And then they got injured by the raiders, and then the girl came back from her hunting trip and killed the raiders, and then put the two boys in bed and saved their lives, right?
Yeah.
But then you can do other weird stuff like the AI director that I put in that game, I chose the random one. His name is Randy Random, and when the two boys got injured, a dark hooded figure came out of the woods, and it turned out that it was one of the two boys' brother, and he came in and started teaching them how to use guns. Like, it's crazy. Like that plays.
Yeah, that almost feels like AI Dungeon, you know?
Yeah, right. Yeah, it
Where
is
you're
like
like,
AI
what
dungeon.
is
Yeah.
happening here? But it's a really cool like story like thing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I mean, that I could write a story out of that. I could take that and
Well,
totally
and
write a story.
that was the question I started with last week with 2077, right?
Yeah,
Is it interesting to play the game? And that's one level, right?
right.
Like, is the story the game is telling you as you play it interesting enough to keep you going? And that's
Yeah,
one level of storytelling. But the next level of storytelling is, if I told you what I did in the game, would that be an interesting story?
right.
Yeah.
Right? Like, am I generating my own legend?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And those are the games that are become really interesting to me. And like, so this is, from the ancient history of gaming, but when I was at Princeton, my senior year, there was a guy who was a year ahead of me as an undergraduate, and then he was in the graduate school studying music with like Milton Babbitt. I mean, these huge, famous like experimental music people. And he was just kind of a coder, he was just like brilliant polymath
Cool.
guy named Andy Milburn, and he became part of a group called Tom and Andy that you just type Tom and Andy into Google sometime, one word, all lowercase, Tom and Andy,
Yeah.
and you'll see what they've done. Tons of soundtracks, scores to big movies, commercials, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, polymath. And so we had a time sharing system, a big timeshare mainframe, as most schools did. This was 1985, 1986,
Yeah.
and he built with sort of suggestions from me and a buddy of mine who was in the writing program as I was. He built this game where we all were at different terminals in the on the time sharing system, and it would write the states of the game to the hard drive, and we would read them off, right, for each other. And one person was the captain of this 3-person cruise starship,
Yeah.
right? And that person was the captain, and that person controlled like the power of the engines, the direction of the ship, just the vector the ship was following, and probably like sensors and stuff. And
Yeah.
one person was the weapons person who defended the ship when it got attacked on its way to this planet it was going to. And one person was just kind of the janitor, like made sure that all the power systems were set up and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
it's really cool. Like you had a nuclear pile on the ship, and this was all in text, right? This was all,
Yeah.
every graphics were text, right? So the
Mhm.
way the nuclear generator looked was, it was just eyes down the middle of a a grid, and when various elements of the generator would start to get out of balance, right, and the it's more complicated to explain than maybe it's worth, but like, and everybody had, their job was to maintain the nuclear pile. So like,
Right.
if I wasn't getting much energy, because as the nuclear pile got out of balance, it supplied less and less power to the systems on the ship,
Right. Right.
right? So like, and the janitor just gave power to different systems. So like, our communication system, we would just type messages to each other. And like, if the janitor said, "Well, I don't have enough to power the engines, the weapons, the shields, and communications, I'm going to pull out energy from communications," it would start dropping letters out, right, and just replacing them with asterisks.
Wow.
Right, so we're writing to each other, and it's just you learn you're just typing everything 3 times, right?
Right.
Because and we weren't like you couldn't see what the janitor was powering or not powering, so you had to just
Right.
assume from what you were getting, you had to figure out kind of what the situation was.
Yeah, and
And
that yeah, totally.
well, and so, and so, I mean, in the game, like it was very simple. Like you just flew toward this planet, and the and either the captain kind of got you there, or the captain didn't get you there, and either the weapons guy managed to hold off the aliens or he didn't, and right, and like things like if I wasn't getting energy, I could look at the nuclear pile, and if I saw like one of like if say the third down eye was way over to the right in the positive side, if it was 3 over to the positive side, I could type in like C -3, and that would shove it 3 over to the left, right? But I had no idea if anybody else was doing the exact same thing at the exact same time.
Right, right.
Yeah, and so like if both of us noticed there was a problem, we would immediately overcorrect, right? And the nuke would start to go critical and shit like that.
Yeah.
And the other things we could do was the captain could eject anybody at any time, right? If he felt you were being deleterious to the mission, he could just shoot you in outer space.
Right.
But it always gave you like 30 seconds before he could do it, so you could like the janitor could just jack everything up,
Right, right.
before he got ejected into outer space, so the ship would just go critical and be destroyed and shit like that. Anyway, the thing that this game did that no other game I've ever played did was it wrote a diary of everything that happened, right?
Oh.
And because the fog of war was so powerful, because I didn't know what they were doing, I'm just interpreting from this very sketchy data that I'm getting, what everybody is up to and what they're trying to accomplish. At the end of the game, we would end up with this thing and be 15 pages long, right?
Yeah.
And you could go through and read what everybody else did, and it was all timestamped. So
Yeah.
you could see what the other players were doing, and like, were you correct or were you not correct? And right, and did you just blow up the ship for no reason, or like it was so you literally ended up with a story at the end of a game, and it was
Right.
a story of what you all did, and because there were 3 of you, the games changed, even though the choices were very limited.
Yeah.
The games changed depending on what roles people played and how they took them on, and we found that we would take on the characteristics of whatever role we had.
Right.
Right? So like if you're the captain, you're kind of domineering, you're really ready to just shoot people into outer space because they're fucking up your ship. Right? If you're the
Yeah.
janitor, you're yelling at everybody like, stop using so much energy for the weapons, right?
Right.
If you're the weapons guy, you're like, fuck everything, just give me shields and weapons, that's all we need. Right?
Yeah,
And
totally.
so it's just fascinating, like, and so within a very narrow set of parameters, we wrote tons and tons. We played this thing an obscene amount of time.
Yeah.
And we just wrote so many different stories out of those same elements. And the stories were written because we each had our own motivation, and we were very unclear about what the other people were doing. Right.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, that
like a real job. Like, I mean, your job was like, I don't know what my boss is doing, but he's screwing around with me. So fuck that guy. I'm gonna blow up the nuclear generator.
Well, that narrative, like that narrative disconnect, or the I'm forgetting
Wait,
the
no,
word,
I'm supposed to be here.
but
What?
not like
Why?
that.
Oh my god.
But that narrative disconnect, I think, is just brilliant, and it's like it's the type of narrative that only a game can play, or it can only it's the only form of media that can produce that type of narrative.
Right.
Game. It's the only way, because games are imagine watching a movie where every, I don't know, 15 seconds you rolled a die, and depending on the outcome of that die, it changed what happened in the film. Right? That's a game, basically.
Yeah.
And in like in ultra simple terms, that's basically what a game is. And So, like, if Christopher Nolan genuinely like said like, hey, by the way, my new film, like you bring a die with you because you're gonna roll it a bunch, people would be like, this is. I mean, you'd probably get all these crazy think pieces saying like it's destroying film, but it would be a talked about film. Let's put it that way.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah, without a
The
doubt.
way Memento was, for instance, right? And
Yeah.
Memento is a much simpler version of what you're describing.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and so for me, like this is the thing that games have been doing so well since they've existed. So like, it's interesting to me that very select few games are iterating on it. Like Total War, I think iterates on it. I don't know if anybody played the new Total War, the China one. Holy
No, I
hell!
haven't. I haven't.
I just a quick example. So in my most recent play of the Total War Three Kingdoms, I'm playing as some historical figure. He's real. I don't. His name is Cao Cao. I don't know much about him, but in my playthrough, role playing as him, he has a wife, and I needed to get some of these kind of minor factions off my borders. So I started this fight, and I was, in most of those games, you start from humble beginnings, like you have a small plot of land, and you need to defend it, and then you can expand, right? That's kind of the gameplay loop of Total War. But
Mhm.
the thing that Three Kingdoms did that was so amazing was that it took your generals and it put them in the battle in a more meaningful way. So like they could be individually controlled and they could duel opposing generals and stuff like that. There's even a version of the game called story mode. Like when you pick to begin, it says, do you want to play Total War story mode or Total War classic? And story mode throws more story elements into it. So one of the things that was amazing that happened was as I was trying to push the Yellow Turban Rebellion off of my borders, I had to go to these wars, but I didn't have enough generals, so Cao Cao had to hire his wife to be a general. And then it turned out she was really good at it, like really good at being a general. And so I had these fights that were like, fire arrows, and Cao Cao and his wife are leading their retinue up the side of the hill, and they're side by side on horseback, and I'm like, this is the climax of like 100 novels that are
Right.
not as arresting as this. Like watching as I watched them because I told them to do it, you know what I mean? And I'm like, I hope she doesn't die because then it's my fault, right? Not the author's fault, it's my fault.
Yeah.
And so, and she didn't die, thankfully. But, and then after that, I found out she was pregnant. So she was a pregnant general who was charging up the side of a hill and she was annihilating people. And I was like, imagine a pregnant Chinese princess or queen charging up the side of a hill under fire of arrows.
No, that's a very like Chinese mythological
Yeah.
story.
It's
No,
brilliant.
it's easy to imagine that coming straight out of. But see, and that's the thing, right? I mean, I think what we're talking about here is our mythology of ourselves,
Yeah.
right? And the mythologies that characters build for themselves. That my sense is that these characters are not building a mythology. Other characters aren't building mythology around them. They aren't building a mythology of themselves, right? And so it's not, you're not, and yet mythology, like that's what we do. That's how
Right.
things become stories,
Right.
right? Something epic happens, and then over generation after generation after generation, you tell the story again and again, and every iteration takes on new, depending on who's telling it and what their situation is, yeah, it takes on a different shading and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But we're not creating like mythological, stories.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, like your story of the and Total War does a great job with that. I think. I mean, I play Total War Colonial all the time, and
Oh
I'll
yeah.
just set up like, and I suppose this is terribly on PC or whatever, but like I'll just be with a few guys in a cabin, and there would just be like there are just a ton of like Huron,
Yeah.
right? And we're just like, oh fuck, like we're dead. And I love that feeling of like, oh my god, like we're alone on what is basically an alien planet.
Right.
Yeah, and we're up against these weapons. We've got kind of better weapons, but they're really slow, and
Yeah.
you know what I mean. And so yeah, if you hit somebody with 65 caliber lead ball, they're dead. But of
Right.
course, in the meantime, they filled you and your friend up with arrows from a recurve bow, you
Right,
know?
right, yeah,
And so, and it's like I feel like, okay, I'm actually experiencing, and I don't even plan to win, right? I'm like, I know it's an unwinnable scenario, but
right,
it's also like part of history. It's like, oh, like the people who went through this never got to tell their story. And
right,
so this is a way I can read a novel about it, or I can read a short story about it, or I can play it on this, it's like, being, Romans against, just, hordes of barbarian Germans, right?
right, right, yeah,
And you're like, well, or being, barbarian Germans up against the Roman war machine. Like either
right.
side of
Is
it,
interesting. It's totally interesting.
right. It's just mythological,
Mhm.
Yeah,
right?
I
And
like
you can
that.
imagine
Yeah,
like you're playing a game that's actually a story that has passed down through ages. And I and
right.
I don't get that feeling out of RPG games. I get it more out of something like Total War or even Elite Dangerous, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
strategy games do a pretty good job, and also simulators do a pretty good job because once again, they pull back on their narrative and then they force upon you to have to fill in narrative gaps, right? So like there was no reason for me to tease that narrative out of the pregnant Chinese woman. I mean, I think it was absolutely like it couldn't be more right for me to pick in
right.
terms of like playing it, but I didn't have to. I could have just been like, well, her stats are really high, and therefore, when she swings her sword, it does X amount of damage, so it only
Well,
makes sense,
Yeah.
related, a long time ago, this was years ago when I was really into Civilization 5. I used mods to like be able to, pick like your units for and like start in various eras and such.
Yeah.
And one thing I did was I had a nuclear submarine and put it in like the ancient era and gave it two nuclear weapons and then just kind of messed around. I screwed up because I accidentally placed it into like a small lake instead of the ocean. But I sort of
See, that's
messed her.
way better.
It's
That's
brilliant.
way better. Can
It's
you imagine being a contemporary person on the crew of a nuclear sub with
A,
two
a nuclear Russian
electronic?
sub, the Red October.
Yeah, and you got two nuclear weapons, but that's the only real substantial advantage you have over the hundreds of thousands of people around you. Like that's a story or a novel or a film
yeah.
I would absolutely be in the audience for.
I was gonna say, yeah, like if I were at Barnes and Noble or a bookstore or whatever or on Amazon and I was reading the synopses and I saw a book that said this sub from the future has been transported back in time to blow up something, but it turns out they made a mistake and it's in a lake and not the ocean, I would have already bought the book. I would have bought it. It's
Right,
over.
exactly. I mean, it's just that's a
It
thrilling.
ended. It ended with me nuking a barbarian camp.
Of course.
It's
I mean,
thrilling though, yeah.
what else are you gonna do? But the thing is, like in a scenario like that, like the two nukes that you have are almost too valuable to use,
Yeah.
right? And you could maybe use one of them just to show everybody, well, we're
Right.
God, right? And you
Yeah.
have to do what we say because we could do this as often as we want to,
Right.
right? And that's like the nukes, that the U.S. used in Japan,
Yeah.
right? Like that was it. Like we had no more after those went off, but we had to use them, or at least the theory was you use them in that confident way, like boom, boom. We could go on doing this all day, or you guys could surrender, right?
Right.
And
Right.
in fact, it was a complete bluff because we didn't have any more nuclear weapons. Nobody.
And they were already going to surrender
Yeah.
anyway.
Like I don't know that the home island, I mean, that's a historians can argue that over and over, but it's they're dramatic stakes there, right?
Right.
They're mythological stakes,
Right. Yeah.
and not stakes like, oh, I'm the king of something, right? I mean, because in fact, the people aboard a nuclear submarine are kind of punch clock villains. They're like
Right.
workaday people.
Mhm.
So but I mean, it reminds me like the guy who like he was on some board, some alt history forum, And right before he went to lunch, he wrote, like 600 words about, somebody else proposed the question, and this guy was interested in Roman history. Like, could a contemporary mobile combat unit of the Marines, like take out, a Roman legion, right?
Right.
And so he wrote 600 words of fiction on it. He went out to lunch, and when he came back, like it had thousands of downloads. And so
Yeah.
every day he would just write, another 500 or 600 words about this. And it was just this huge deal. And the next thing you knew, he had a book deal and he had a movie deal, right?
Right.
Now, who knows, whether I haven't heard any more about it since then. Will it be a big deal? Not, who knows, right? But it's that idea that you're proposing these kind of like mythological confrontations, right?
Yeah.
And it's Jungian. It has a lot to do with archetypes, like one archetype struggling against another archetype.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what does that result in? Like what's gonna happen when these two things meet, right? These two
Right.
archetypal mythological forms meet.
Yeah, and so I think to kind of to tie this back into Cyberpunk 2077 and many other games like Skyrim and Fallout and stuff like that, now that we're coming to 5, I think the point of the conversation that we're trying to make here is that while I don't want to get rid of narrative in games, like pre-rendered narrative, I guess, pre-written narrative in games. Like I actually genuinely liked the story of Cyberpunk 2077. I didn't like my character. I didn't really like how he talked. He didn't talk how I thought I would talk in this world.
Yep.
And but on the whole, I liked the characters. I thought the stakes were interesting. I thought it had interesting ideas, but to answer the question that you asked 3 episodes, Pinckney, no, I don't feel like I could write a short story out of the things that I did in this game. And I think that is a problem. And I think that is something that could be
really derivative
yeah.
of Cyberpunk 2077.
It would be fanfic. Not that there's anything wrong with fanfic, but it would be fanfic.
Right. It would be, yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think that's part of why the tabletop game is set before 2077. The one that released simultaneously, Cyberpunk Red, is set before 2077.
Yeah,
I just want to point out while we're having this discussion, this door here really captures my imagination.
It's a door to another door. That's strange.
And I know things are hard, like in general, like making games, but like
that is really funny.
I find
and
that
just for reference.
I really love.
Here we are.
Yeah, I thought it was funny. I wonder if you could just can you get in on the other side and then unlock it? Is that why it's like that? I think
it's a real place, because this is like a dungeon encounter that I did.
But to kind of pull out a
sorry.
Very good. To go back to Cleveland's point, which I thought was a good one. I think there's a reason why some of the earliest iterations of these types of games, these like fantastical narrative-based games, have their roots in Dungeons and Dragons, right? And and Cyberpunk is a derivative of Dungeons and Dragons, it's just as all of these are, right? Or whatever one came before it. I don't know if Dungeons is the first one, but it doesn't matter.
It's the first, yeah.
Oh, it is, okay. So
there's a complicated history to it, but.
Yeah, but the idea behind it in general is that you have a dungeon master who is an AI. That's what they are. They're an AI, and they generate a story for you and your friends to play in. And then you use dice as game elements affected by stats, which are characterization elements, just like you would have characterization elements in a story. Like it'd be really weird if the main character was really good with big giant swords, suddenly picked up like a bow and he was just as nimble. You'd be like, that's not really believable. So like that's something that has been perfected in the imagination type game, but it's not perfected in video games.
Right. It's not expansive enough somehow.
Yeah, it
right?
doesn't. It just doesn't allow
Or it's
you.
that the governing intelligence isn't nimble enough to be like a really good game of D&D.
Right. Yeah, told
I
by
mean,
like
in
a
a way, I think what we're advocating, and let's maybe investigate this idea. I know we're almost done for today, but right is rather than a game that plays itself out, what you need is a set, right? And like characters and stuff. But it needs to be a multiplayer game where you really do have a DM and you really do have people playing the parts, or maybe it's one person and a bunch of
yeah,
NPCs or something like that, right? And it would be kind of there's actually a version of it's a combat game. But they have you can actually DM for someone else, and you can sort of throw things in on the fly,
yeah,
right? So like if they get past your infantry, you can say, oh well, there's a tank right up ahead,
yeah,
or a machine gun nest or whatever, right? And so something like that, right, where you would trigger things that happen in this world,
right,
yeah, or something because when we talk about AI, like what's the irreplaceable thing? Like what's the thing people do that AI can't do?
right,
And maybe that's it, or maybe we're in a or maybe they will eventually, but we're in a moment where like the AI is either too loosey goosey, like AI Dungeon, right? And it kind of fucks the story up just because like Mad Libs is only fun for so long,
right,
right? Or it's too doctrinaire and too kind of on rails or something
right.
like that. And
Yeah,
humans could get in the middle of that somewhere,
right,
right? Like my
That
daughter's a
judgment.
great DM because her stories are really funny. They're almost satires of D&D, but they're also like you get involved with them, right? Like
yeah,
you just put this really friendly bear, a talking bear, in this, and like we all just fell in love with this bear, and she
yeah.
meant talking bear as a joke, but he became like he was a hero to all of us, you
Right,
know.
right,
And so it's this middle ground that people can occupy that seems to escape a kind of mechanization
yeah,
or an automation. So
right. Yeah, I mean, like if Baldur's Gate was the first great iteration, because all Baldur's Gate and Icewind Dale, all those games were ever trying to do was try to be as close to a stand-in for a Dungeons and Dragons adventure
right,
that you could play by yourself, right? And not have to roll so many dice because the computer would do it for you. That's all those games were trying to do. And they're still as like the most memorable games in the history of gaming. Like even somebody who's only tertiarily aware of games knows Baldur's Gate. Um, and Disco is a natural offshoot of this. Disco takes direct inspiration from Baldur's Gate, from the writers of those games, from the writers who went on to write Planescape, which is considered like the craziest version of those games. And then Disco takes the mantle out now as like the king of the RPG because of I've done a lot of crazy research about this, but that's the general consensus is that this is what's happened now, and it's through exploring these elements more, I think, is where we're going to see more innovation and finding like what you're talking about, Pinckney, of like getting close to the Turing, like getting close to the Turing test of like an AI that can
right,
genuinely generate your own, that can help you generate your own narrative, but also has its own narrative that it's telling you.
right. Yeah, it
There's
has its interests, and you have your interests, and they coincide in an exciting narrative.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. No. All right. Well, so next week, for those of you who are watching, perhaps next week we will have announcements about a new development for
Yeah.
this Twitch stream and for Neophyte Studios and for the MFA program with which we are all involved.
Yeah.
And it could be fun and profitable for our viewing public. So
Yeah.
tune in next week. And
All tens of you, and
Yeah.
hopefully more
Hey,
that find out.
45. All
Invite your
45.
friends.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We have
and
45
it's
followers.
going to be cool, and you can participate
Yes.
in helping us to figure out what the next iteration of narrative game looks
Yep. While we play RimWorld.
like.
I'm just going to remind you.
We're also going to play RimWorld.
Okay, good.
Is
No, I'm
it
really excited to do that. I mean, you know.
is it multiplayer by chance? Is it
No,
something that we
it's
should,
not.
okay.
Yeah.
So we'll
Okay.
watch you play RimWorld.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Good deal.
All right.
All right.
See you all next week.
See ya.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.